Hello everyone, welcome back to Tinateach Python. Today is a new day, a new lesson. This time we're diving into a very important concept in Python, and that is function. You use function for a lot of things. They're basically just little algorithms, little block of codes that does thing for you. And since we haven't encountered any forms of functions before, we're gonna be taking a look at the definition, the syntax, and arguments. Now this may look, very few materials that we need to go through, but don't you worry, there are many varieties of arguments, different types of arguments, as well as the syntaxes for arguments. And arguments is an important thing, and we need to, explore it and further. So this is not the first lesson that we're going to be exploring arguments. We're going to be exploring arguments in another lesson as well, because arguments are basically just data input for the Python functions. And if you want, an algorithm to work properly, you need to give it the correct data. Let's move on to the first part of definition and usage. Now, a function, as I've said before, is a block of code that only runs when it's called upon. So I have a sample of what a function may look like over here. We start with def, okay? My function. Now, instead of having a space, you would go with an underscore, and then you would have a parenthesis, right? But since we're not dealing with any arguments or any extra parameters, we'll just leave this blank for now. And so def my function, what this does is that it prints this is a new function, okay? And if you just stop here, that's a good function right there. Like it's complete, nothing's missing, but it will not run. What you need to do is you need to call upon the function one more time. So you have my function, basically rewriting the name, and that's how you would call a function. And only once you've written this does a function starts running. Okay, let's move on. Now let's talk about arguments and parameters. They're very similar but also very different. Okay, so both are interchangeable. They both represent information passed into a function, but if you want to get more specific, a parameter is a variable or data given to the function within the parentheses here. And an argument is the value that's sent to the function when it's called. So an argument would be over here, okay? Parameter, argument. But they're essentially the same thing, okay? So you can use them interchangeably unless you want to get, really technical. Now, let's dive first into arguments. Arguments is a variety of data, can be given to functions. So you can add as much as you want, and you separate them by adding a comma in between each of them. We start with def my function, and we have our first, we call this parameter or argument. Favorite color, print favorite color plus is my favorite color. Now, we're moving on to the technical argument part. My function, this is calling upon the function, okay? My function, purple. My function, yellow. So this would print two instances of my function. The first one would be purple is my favorite color. The second one is yellow is my favorite color. Next up to the number of arguments. A function must be called with the same number of arguments as, the same quantity of parameters. So if a function only has one parameter, it only needs one argument, no more, no less, otherwise you get an error. But if you want to bypass that error in the case of not knowing the exact quantity of argument or parameter that you need, I'll show you in a little bit. We'll start with def my function. We have two parameter, quantity and animal. Print quantity plus, this is a spacing, okay? Because with string, it just goes like that. There's no extra padding, no extra margin. You have to add your own spacing, your own new line and breaks and whatnot, plus parameter animal. Now, once we get to calling it, my function passing in 2, so that's 2 for quantity, and cats for animal. The first instance of this would print 2 cats with a spacing in between. So, it's not just 2 and cats sticking to each other. And the same thing goes with the second instance of my function, 15 dogs, all right, with the spacing. Now, arbitrary arguments. This is what I've been wanting to talk about. In the case of you not knowing how many arguments that will be passed into your function, the function will receive a tuple of arguments instead. And that's how it'll access the necessary information. Def my function, once again, we have pets. Now, this little star right here, this asterisk, okay, that signifies to Python that this is an arbitrary argument. You don't know how many you're going to pass in. Print my pets include pets 2. Now, once we get to calling it, my function, we give it, a bunch of items for the tuple, cat, dog, and fish. And since this is number 2, we go 0, 1, and 2. So this will print out my pets include fish, okay? But I forgot to include the spacing in between these two, so it's just gonna stick together, and that's something that you do have to pay attention to. Let's move on to the last part, keyword arguments. This is not the end of arguments, okay? We're just going through the surface, and we're gonna dive deeper into arguments, syntaxes, and varieties in the next lesson. With this keyword arguments, you can pass in this format key equal value syntax, so the order of the arguments does not matter. We have def my function, our parameters are pet1, pet2, and pet3. Print, I only have a, pet2, plus in my house. Now we're calling it pet1 equals cat, pet2 equals dog, pet3 equals fish. So this instance will print out, I only have a dog. So let's start with def my function, and then print, this is a new function, okay? And now we're gonna call it my function, so it'll run in our console. Let's move on to the next part that we studied, arguments and parameters. Def my function, favorite color, that is our parameters. Print, favorite color, plus, so this is appending, is my favorite color. And then we're going to call it 2 times my function, just so we can see what arguments can do. Purple. And then my function, red. All right. Now let's move on to the next part with numbers of arguments. Definition, my function, quantity. So we're having 2, quantity and animal. Print quantity plus some spacing, all right, plus animal. And then we're going to call it my function 2 and cats. My function 10 and ducks. All right. Next up, to arbitrary arguments, my function, so that denotes arbitrary arguments. Print, my pets include, some spacing, plus pets at index 2, my function, ducks, cats, and fishes, and dogs. All right. And then let's move on to the last part of keyword argument. Keyword argument. I'm going to delete this typo. My function pet number 1, pet number 2, and pet number 3 print. I only have some spacing, pet number 2, let's say, a pen in my house. All right, let me add a period. Then we're going to call it my function pet 1 equals to cat, pet 2 equals to duck, pet 3 equals to fish. Okay. Now, since this is not arbitrary, we do have to stay with, the same parameters and the same arguments. So let's see how this works. Over here, you can see that unsupported operand types for int and string. Now, this would be an error that you will encounter when you work with function. What it means is that you cannot combine an integer denoted as quantity passed in as 2, for example, with a string animal passed in as a string and the spacing being a string over here. Okay. Another way to get through it is that you passed in quantity as a string as well, okay, because it's hard to pass in cats and ducks as integers. So let's run this, and as you can see, there is no more error. So that's one of the ways that you can handle that sort of error with mismatched data types. All right. First off, we have, very simple def my function print. This is a new function, and then purple as an argument for this function. So you have purple is my favorite color, and then red is my favorite color. You can see how functions are very convenient. Next up, quantity and animal, all of these are strings, okay? 2 cats, 10 ducks, 10 ducks, okay? With the spacing. Now, if you exclude this, you run it one more time, they're stuck together, okay? Next up, to pets. My pets include arbitrary arguments, number 2. So we have 0, 1, and 2, and 3. So it becomes my pets include fishes, all right? Last but not least, I only have a pet number 2 in my house. And we have, pet number 2 over here as a duck. I only have a duck in my house, right? We're missing a spacing over here. Now, if I just add this little guy over here and run it again, okay, that's something that you do have to pay attention to, and it's, just one of the petty mistakes that you can make. Now, that's it for our brief introduction to Python's functions. Next lesson is going to be a harder grind and better look at arguments, okay? It's very important. Functions are very, just like while loop and for loops, it's very useful, very convenient to put in your code. You basically cannot function without it. All right, so don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope that you enjoy this lesson, and don't forget to tune in to my next Python lesson. Learn today, better tomorrow. Remember to like and subscribe. Goodbye.